everybody. Welcome to the Convocation Unscripted. You're in the place where religion, culture, and politics intersect in real time. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Jamar Tisby, joined as always by Kristin Dumay
Hey, Jamar, good to see you.
and Robbie Jones.
Hey, Jamar.
We always say, "Where's Waldo?" when referring to Diana Butler Bass, our fourth co-host. She is traveling internationally. We cannot wait to see pictures and hear stories. Of course, we're scholars who explore how religion shapes America's past and present, and my does it ever. But the kicker is we're responding in real time to the events of the day. So no preps, no scripts, just raw, unfiltered conversation. That's why we call it unscripted. And this episode is officially in session. This is fun because we're coming off of an exceptional week in the life of the Convocation Unscripted. Blame/credit goes once again to Robbie, who seems always to have new and fresh ideas. So recap for us, Robbie, how the idea came to you and what we did last week.
Well, we were finishing up our recorded episode, and then we all sort of like looked at each other and realized that there was this Trump speech that we were all going to have to watch. And we all felt a little bit dejected about it. And I think we were like, well, let's watch it together. And then we're like, oh, and let's invite other people to watch it with us together. So we, with like 2 hours notice, just kind of threw up we're going to be on live. You want to join us? And lo and behold, we had 1,200 people jump on who are feeling exactly the same way. It's like, I need to watch this probably, but like, I really don't want to do it by myself. And I want to do it where I can talk about get some live fact checking and some community while I'm having to watch this.
Kristin, you notice how he's like expanded the conversation to include us, like we made the decision. It was his idea.
It was totally his idea, but I will say, I said, let's do it.
Oh, you came
Yeah, you were
along.
the first one who said,
I was,
let's do it.
yeah, why not? Because the thought of just, sitting by myself and watching that thing and ruining an evening was actually made considerably better by watching it with you all and with all of our viewers. It's the way to do it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I'm
we'll do
giving
it
you a hard
again.
time, Robbie, but
Yeah.
it was an inspired idea. Yeah, over 1,200 of y'all showed up, and it was like the perfect case in point of what we say, like, come with your despair, grow in community, because it was really a chilling speech and a chilling occasion. And yet, because we were all on together processing in real time, it didn't feel quite as dark or unmanageable. I mean, it was, but you know what I mean? Like just the sort of emotion attached to it. It's the sense that everything is more manageable together if we do it together. So I hope folks felt that. And I think it's just like a big old thank you and shout out to our listeners to just hop on with zero notice and engage with us. And the chat was going, it was on and popping the whole time. We had committed to 30 minutes and we stayed about 70.
It was fun.
So, but to recap, like he's laying the groundwork to absolutely challenge and dispute whatever midterm election results he doesn't like or the White House doesn't like. It's suspicious that every election is fine when a Republican wins, but if it's closer, if a Democrat wins, it's all of a sudden fraud and corruption. So we got to look out for that. Spread the word about that. If you didn't catch the episode, go back to convocation.substack.com and you can listen to it again and share with friends.
Yep.
So we got more this week, kind of building off of the awfulness from the White House. We mentioned this, I believe, last week, but we didn't have a chance to go into it deeply. Stephen Miller, just the mention of his name is like, ugh, you want to throw up a little in your mouth. But I think, Robbie, you were the one who brought it up first last week. So give us a recap and a rundown of Miller's speech.
I think Kristin brought it up, actually.
Okay.
I brought it
let's
up
blame
because I
Kristin for
actually
this one.
posted that speech between our podcast and our Substack Live because I had seen it and thought that Miller's speech and Trump's address to the nation really go hand in hand. And so we have to see these things in tandem. So then Robbie ended up catching that speech and rightly says, we need to actually talk about this. And so, Robbie, do you want to just explain a little bit the content of the speech? It was about a 15-minute speech, so it's easy to find and watch online. And as I said last week, I would encourage doing so. It's short, but it is worth your time because it is chilling. And it is particularly chilling for any scholars of 20th century authoritarianism and of Nazi Germany, right? We're just going to go there because you have to. When you hear this speech, you'll understand what we're talking about. And because of its brazenness, right? So for years, scholars, historians have been talking about parallels, have been talking about the authoritarian playbook, writing on that, linking like what's unfolding in our country with, the patterns that we've observed in authoritarian contexts in the 20th century. This was so brazen, so direct. It's almost bewildering because as scholars, we're used to connecting the dots and explaining the parallels, and this is just so in your face. It's hard to even know what to do with it. So, Robbie, can you describe just a little bit what he said and the context in which he gave this speech?
Yeah. Well, first thing is just the setting. There was a gathering that Marco Rubio put together, and there were evidently representatives from 67 countries gathered at this thing. So it looked like a little mini UN thing, but it was a kind of fabricated meeting around the so-called quote resurgence of political terrorism. All right, and so that was the reason for this thing. But then Miller, so Rubio gave a speech that also had its moments where you were like, oh wait, like But Miller then gives the speech, and he only talks about the leftist violence. And just as a quick reminder, our own FBI, our own CIA, all of the things, and in particular looking at domestic threats to violence, all have concluded, as late as 2025, that the threats inside the country to violence mostly come from white supremacists in the country. Like that is our own government's official thing, and yet, and that's on the right, right, and yet. Miller's speech mentions none of that at all. But the truly chilling part is where he takes this odd turn and he starts talking about the fact that you can look at someone and tell whether they're a terrorist. And particularly if they're a leftist terrorist. I'm just going to read a little bit of this because, and you really should watch it. And I do think, like, I'm not the historian here, but I do think that, like, if I were writing a history of this moment and kind of key turning points, Miller's speech and Trump's speech, together, like these are two that I would kind of hold up as worthy of kind of making part of the narrative of how we end up wherever we end up. So here's what he says. He's talking about, radical leftists. This is kind of midway through the speech. He takes this weird turn. He kind of takes a breath. And he says, but let's not pretend for a moment that these radical leftists, these terrorists, are operating from a place of sincere political conviction. Sure, there are plenty of useful idiots that they use who may believe these discredited ideologies. The leftist is fundamentally motivated by envy, by hatred, by jealousy. The leftist looks at what is beautiful and what is good and what is natural and is filled with envy and hatred. The leftist looks at a perfect family and with a perfect life and a perfect job and perfect kids that goes to church every Sunday and is filled with a feeling of inadequacy and jealousy. They covet, and they turn those emotions ultimately into a desire to subjugate, to oppress, and to inflict pain and suffering. Now, here's the turn. It's not a coincidence that when you look at these violent Antifa demonstrations, when you see any photograph of those who are assembled, to be blunt, not one of the people demonstrated looks like a normal person. No one looks normal. They're all deformed in some way, in their appearance, in their dress, in their mannerisms. Why is that? You look at two photographs and you see a normal American street and you see an Antifa protest? Why the people who are violently demonstrating? Why is there not one normal looking person among them? Every one of them, through the course of their life and their decisions, has scarred their body and their appearance in many different ways to the point at which their outer appearance becomes a manifestation of their inner hatred. And then he looks right at the camera and he says, trust your instincts. To all people and across all civilizations, you know what normal is. You know what beautiful is. You know what good is. You know that families are right. You know that children are precious and beautiful and must be protected. You know that the criminal and the junkie and the predator is a threat to normal, healthy living. And he just kind of goes on and on and on. And then he says, like, these people covet, and he goes back to this theme coveting, they are coveting people who are morally superior, who are
Yes.
superior in the simple, truthful way they live their lives, people they look at who are happy and ordered
Ordered,
and
hugely
peaceful and
important.
contributing to their communities. That burns an ember in them. And that's how you end up with the horrors we've seen through history where good families are dragged into the street and executed.
Yes, thank you, Robbie. Ordered.
Yeah.
This jealousy, this I'm going to read a little passage here, actually, because this is not the first time Stephen Miller has said these things.
Yeah.
And I actually quote his words in Live, Laugh, Love, at the end of Live, Laugh, Love at Charlie Kirk's memorial service, where he gave his, "We are the storm" speech. Erica is the storm. And he spoke thereto directly to his enemies, to the enemies of all that is good, to those trying to foment hatred against us. And then he spoke of good and evil and of his fellow Americans in equally chilling terms. Here's what he said: "You are wickedness. You are hatred. You are nothing. You have nothing to share but bitterness. We have beauty. We have light. We have goodness. We are on the side of God."
Yeah. All right.
So,
I'm going to go ahead and just say it. I mean, you can find passages in Mein Kampf that sound like this, right? That talk about Jews as being deformed, right, and sickly, and inferior, and subhuman. I mean, this language, right? If you look at cartoons, right, from Nazi Germany, cartoons from the U.S. Around about African Americans or Italians, and in certain historical moments, and they all disfigure. Right, facial features. They draw them as kind of gross and grotesque, and it is this idea that their physical appearance carries the state of their soul, right? That this outer disfigurement is a expression of moral deformity and moral inferiority. I mean, that is the direct racist, white supremacist argument that Stephen Miller is making in this speech.
So all of this is reminding me of scientific racism.
Yeah,
And there's an entire movement, right? Like we now often correct people for using the term Caucasian because that comes out of scientific racism. Johann Blumenbach, he created these categories and said that Caucasians, people from the Caucasus region, represented like the most beautiful, natural, normal form of humanity based on appearance, and therefore, we're the highest. So it's all part of attributing moral and intellectual capabilities and qualities based on appearance. I also think of uh, phrenology, the pseudoscience that looked at the skull and claimed that a skull shape could reveal intelligence and virtue, or being prone to criminality. It could reveal personality traits. And so Miller's language around this is drawing on the same kinds of notions of scientific racism in the 19th century and beyond. You can probably make connections into the eugenics movement and
yeah,
everything like that, but it is a really disturbing rhetorical turn that it seems like very few people have taken notice of, and very few people are connecting the dots to say, like, it's not just words. You have to carry out these words to their logical conclusion, which
Yeah.
would simply be profiling people based on their, oh, you got tattoos or you got piercings or your hair is dyed a certain color. Well, you're a leftist terrorist and you're part of the plot and you need to be shut down and controlled. Like that's where it leads. And I think that's why folks like us are so alarmed when others can say, oh, it's just a speech. No, it's not just a speech. It's what that
Yeah.
speech indicates as to where we may be heading.
Yeah. I'm going to throw up. I'm going to do a Kristin. All right. In backslide, I got it. I mean, we're tracking this, in real time here. But Trump gave a speech in I don't know how to say it, Beltrami County, Minnesota. After that county had voted on a ballot measure to reject refugees, right, in their county. He came to the county, gave a speech, and he said this to a nearly all white crowd, talked to them and said, talked to them about how they had good genes in Minnesota, right? He says a lot of it is about the genes, don't you believe? The racehorse theory. You think we're so different? Well, you have good genes in Minnesota. And he recently has reiterated this racehorse theory. Like he really thinks, right? This kind of genetic, and it's about moral superiority. And we're back to hierarchy, who's on top, who's not, all that. And it's gender, it's race, it's religion, all of those things, right? Let it play into it.
And this language of appearance also, I think, probably goes without saying, but we're saying anyway. What this is, how this is functioning here is dehumanizing swaths of the population whom you disagree with politically, which is something that Trump has been doing from day one, right? Dehumanizing immigrants, dehumanizing, right, protesters and leftists, right? Nothing new here. This is taking it one step further, but also the logic here is by situating these leftists by it's not just dehumanizing them, but it's also situating them as essentially predators, right?
Yeah.
So it presents a sense of like fake vulnerability that they hate you and that they are jealous of you and they want to destroy you because of that jealousy, right? Completely fabricating reality and a moral framework to go with it. To what end, right? And the end is obvious. They must be destroyed. There is no goodness in them, and they want to destroy you because of your goodness, because of your beauty. This is wild stuff. I do not believe in my lifetime I've ever heard anything even remotely close to this in this country. My guess is you probably could if you went to a white nationalist rally
Right.
somewhere, but not from the sitting president or members of his administration.
Well, I think that rhetoric is absolutely chilling. And because he's in this position of power, we should take it very seriously. But the other part that he did in this speech that's probably going to have an even more direct impact is characterizing, first of all, inflating this notion of left-wing violence, as we've said. Most of the political violence that we're seeing is coming from right-wing actors, and in particular, white supremacists, white nationalists, right? They're the ones marching in the streets on July 4th with their faces covered in Washington, D.C. But then taking this spurious notion of left-wing violence and framing it as a national security concern and saying that we are going to align all of our law enforcement and intelligence agencies to work together to, quote, disrupt, identify, defund, debank arrest and prosecute these political terrorists,
Yep.
is the actual words that he used.
Yeah.
Understand what someone like Stephen Miller means when he uses that language. He's framing typical political discourse and disagreement now as an existential threat to the nation itself and calling folks who disagree with this regime's ideology political terrorists. And then if you get thrown under that terrorist label, well, then you can have all kinds of rights stripped away. You can be arrested, you can be censured, you can have funding taken away, and who knows what else. And this, again, just like Trump's speech was laying the groundwork to disrupt the midterms, a speech like this lays the groundwork to disrupt, identify, defund, debank, arrest, and prosecute not actual terrorists who are intending real violence and harm, but simply people who disagree with this White House's ideology, people like us, like scholars, like journalists, like activists, like organizers, like even folks who may just say something online that folks don't like. And I don't know how we can ring the bell loud enough for folks to actually sit up and pay attention. But this really quickly gets into no free speech and no political dissent at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to remind you that the Department of Justice issued a memo last fall already, right, in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, in the wake of that first Stephen Miller address that I read from. And to your point, Jamar, labeled anyone who uses violence or the threat of violence in support of, quote, anti-Americanism,
Yeah.
anti-capitalism, or anti-Christianity as domestic terrorists and committed resources to rooting out such evil doers. So again, listen to those three. Anti-Americanism. What does it mean to be anti-American? And what does it mean to Trump and his cronies to be anti-American, right? That's pretty clear. Anybody who's against them fits in this category. And note too, committing violence or, right, who uses the threat of violence. My guess is that is going to be very loosely defined as well. And then we have anti-capitalism. What counts as anti-capitalism that could get one classified as a domestic terrorist?
Yeah.
You know, Pope Leo better watch out. But you know, anybody arguing for income redistribution? I don't know. I mean, again, these concepts are
Social
very
support
pliable.
systems.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then anti-Christianity. And this is something we've talked about before on this podcast for years already, right? Because they were already floating this 2-3 years ago, right, between Trump's first and second administration, as they were looking ahead to the second administration, right? Anti-Christianity was going to be punished. Now, you know, we're all Christians on this podcast. We should just breathe a sigh of relief. But here too, who gets to define what counts as Christianity and what counts as enemies of Christianity? And I think we know kind of where that goes as well. So once again, this is just expansive and unprecedented rhetoric from the highest echelons of power.
And I think you said
the
key
image.
words there. Yeah, go for it.
I was just say, I mean, the image that I've got, and we're all trained academics, and I mean, the academy trains you to be very cautious and very careful, and not be the sky is falling shrill voice. But like when I hear all this, and I mean, and I kind of went there in the new book. I mean that. What I see is these speeches, this national security presidential memo number 7, that's the basis of all this. Then it's operationalized in DOJ. Stephen Miller giving this speech. I mean, these are the sort of weaving of the net, right?
Exactly.
That is going to close around us at some point. So I just want to kind of like name that.
Unless something happens to
Unless we
prevent
do
it.
something about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
But
exactly how it feels, right? You're watching these pieces be put into place. They've been putting these pieces in place for years now. They ran out of time in the first administration. They made their plans leading up to the second administration, and they have just one piece after another. And if you have eyes to see, right, you're seeing all these pieces or parts of the net being sewn together, right? So to what end? And if you're not paying attention, right, this is this kind of disconnect in the American public. Disconnect isn't just between, you know, wholesale MAGA supporters and everybody else. Within the everybody else category, there's people who are paying close attention and there's people who are somewhat concerned, don't really like what's going on politically, and then go on with their days, right? Which is, the way most of us used to do politics, in a previous lifetime. But this is worth paying attention to.
I would say also that as Miller is talking about coordinating law enforcement and government agencies to go after left-wing terrorists, it also reminds me of the way it reminds me of COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence supposedly program, right? And this was in the 60s and the 70s primarily, and they targeted civil rights, black liberation, even anti-war protests, women's movement, all of those things. And what did they do? They're doing the kinds of things that Miller is hinting at: wiretapping phones. They're forging documents to sow discord and misinformation. They're having undercover agents go in. There's a film. It was particularly vitriolic toward black political organizing. There's a film called Black Messiah talking about Fred Hampton, and that's a phrase coming straight from J. Edgar Hoover, because he instructs COINTELPRO officials to make sure there isn't the emergence of a so-called Black Messiah like MLK who would coalesce the movement and lead them to greater political power. And so there have been targeted efforts like this in the past toward certain groups that the whatever administration was in power deemed disfavored. But now we're hearing it loudly and vocally from folks like Stephen Miller, and let's not let Marco Rubio off the hook for
I was going
convening
to
this
say,
whole
we got to
thing.
talk Marco Rubio here.
he
Right.
convened this whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
let's talk about, you mentioned J. Edgar Hoover. Right, this Trump State Department has cited blacklists and McCarthyism in a memo labeling leftist front groups for communist Cuba. And they name names, including some of the leading members of Democratic Socialists of America, such as, surprise, surprise, Mayor Mamdani, Ilhan Omar, and others, right? So now naming elected
Hmm.
officials and putting them on the enemy list, right? And this is Marco Rubio here. So, for those who want to say, Rubio's the softer, gentler alternative, right? He's a full participant.
No, he
Full
has gone over to
participant.
the other side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fully. Yeah. Do y'all ever pause and just like, I mean, increasingly, I find myself thinking, how can we, quote unquote, let this happen? I say quote unquote because it's, of course, people like us speaking up about it. There's all kinds of activism and organizing. But at the same time, it almost seems as if at a certain point, enough people say enough is enough. And whatever the mechanisms or procedures, we pull the lever because this is ridiculous. And the further we go, the more often I'm thinking like that. Do y'all ever feel that way? You
Yeah.
got to be
Every
watching the
day.
YouTube video to watch our faces. Yeah. Um,
Right.
and it's hard to express because I'm not saying nobody's not doing anything. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that. I'm just saying like they did it in what, South Korea when there was an attempt
Hmm.
at a coup, and they got it done. I'm just saying, it seems like we should increasingly daily be getting to the point where, as a nation and a people, we should be just like, we got to get this guy out,
Yep.
whatever we got to do, in terms of the processes or whatever, but enough is enough. And
So
I
my
don't,
concern
yeah.
is that looking at scholars of authoritarianism and authoritarian resistance movements is that the more kind of authoritarian power takes hold, the harder it is to resist, not primarily because people are afraid, although that will probably come, and some people are rightfully afraid now already, right? Again, you see these pieces being put into place, those of us who are paying attention. It is frightening. But also, there's a kind of moral thing that happens, or living in these increasingly repressive regimes changes all of us.
Mm,
Right, Robbie, you like to talk about bright lines, and so many bright lines have been crossed. So then there's the question, well, if we didn't do something then, why would we do
Yeah.
something now? As concerned as we are, and that's my concern. I will say that in 2024, after the election, and as Trump took office in early 2025, I was waiting expectantly, wondering which line would be that bright line for the American people. In watching, and maybe this one, okay, not that one. Okay, let's wait and see. This one, nope, nope, we're past that. There, right, and this is the kind of flooding the zone that was planned. I get that, but it was planned for a reason, because it's not just that they'll see what sticks and they'll get something done. It's because it changes us. And it's not just overwhelm and hard to keep track of. It changes what we even think about reacting to. Because why this thing? There's 30 other things that happened this week. So where is that crystallizing moment? I don't know, but maybe it will still come, but things will have to get considerably worse for that to come. There was a week where it seemed we might be on the cusp of that with what happened in Minneapolis,
Hmm.
right? And then that too passed for a variety of reasons. And so it's business as usual for most people. Um, yeah, it's I think about this all the time and don't have a clear answer, because the answer is, what will it take?
Yeah.
Clearly something considerably worse than what we've already seen.
I think the challenge too is the size of the country
Yeah.
is a real
mm,
challenge, because if you're in a smaller country and there's more concentrated oppression, you always you know someone who's been directly affected by it. And so if you're in Minnesota, you probably know somebody, right, who was connected with the stuff that happened in Minneapolis. But when it's more diffuse, when it's more under the radar, when it's not Operation Surge in one particular place, it becomes harder to organize against. It becomes harder to see, particularly when there's all kinds of stuff. Like we had what, two more ICE killings last
Yes.
week,
Yep.
right? Of innocent people they weren't even looking for.
Yep.
Um, but they're here and they're there, and it kind of makes the headlines. But there's just so much other stuff going on. I think it's a real challenge because of the size of the country. Yeah, that people, because I think what tends to matter is that social connective, and a lot of the sociological studies about like when protests matter. There's kind of a threshold that they kind of give, but that's usually because that threshold is the point at which people know someone who
Mm.
was involved. And in a country this size, 300 million plus, people, it's challenging to know how any of those stats apply, right, to kind of our situation.
I think you're right, Robbie. I mean, it reminds me of the Martin Niemöller lines of, first they came for the socialists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I didn't speak up. I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there's no one left to speak up. And I think that gets to your point a bit in the sense that I can still go for a walk in my local neighborhood, and you look around and it seems as if nothing has changed, right? You can still go to a restaurant Friday night or to the movies. It seems like all this bad news, what is the real world impact for one of the 330 million Americans here? And unless it's in your neighborhood, unless it's in your church, unless it's in your proximity, it doesn't seem like the sky is falling necessarily. And that doesn't mean it isn't.
Yeah.
It just means that we have some level of insulation for now, but then by the time we feel it personally or in our community, it's far, far, far too late. And it's
Yeah.
way past the time to intervene for the people who are much more vulnerable. It is no coincidence to me that some of the people you named, Kristin, as being on that list, they're not Christian, they're Muslim, they're not
Yes.
white, they're brown skinned, right?
Yep.
Like there are a lot of people who right now, as we take our neighborhood walks or go for ice cream or whatever, are incredibly vulnerable to
Mhm.
what is going on. I saw stats over 1,000 ICE arrests a day
Yeah, and
happening
they're trying for
now.
double that. The quota is 2,000 a day.
Exactly. And that is a I mentioned on this the other podcast, right? Like they're all against quotas with affirmative action, but they're all for it when it comes to ICE, right? Detentions. So all that to say, it may not affect many of us, especially the kind of folks who would listen to this podcast on a day-to-day basis yet. It will, and it probably does in ways that we haven't examined yet. But by the time it does, it's already too late. And so we have to act now. And I'm just like, I don't know if there is a like national caucus or election or referendum we can hold and just like get him out of office and let's reel it back in, folks, because
How
that's what
many
we got to do.
Republicans? How many
Six.
Republicans?
Six Republicans.
Thank you, Robbie.
Six. What
So
we
Right,
need.
and
frustrating.
that's the problem, right? Because our
Yeah.
political system is structured to be responsive to or depends on our representatives being responsive to public voices, right? And that's not happening. And so you can get millions of people out for a No Kings rally. You can get people showing up at their representatives' town halls, although most representatives are kind of, in many districts are restricting attendance and being a lot more cautious there. It's not kind of a free for all. Um, so this is it feels like the system is broken, and everything comes up, short that runs through our normal political system, right? That's just not working, which is a bad situation to be in for all kinds of reasons, right? Because and that's really what we're looking at now to the midterms, because that's the chance to change that political obstacle. And that's why Trump was speaking about the midterms. And that's why they are so openly seeding election conspiracy theories long in advance, because they are not going to be accepting the results of the election if they don't go their way. At least I don't know of any other interpretation that would make
Yeah.
sense of why they would be perpetuating these unfounded conspiracy theories.
Yeah, and just to say it again, I mean the important thing is that the elections not be close.
Mm-hmm.
It is if it's a 51-49 kind of race, it is easy to subvert around the margins, right? Invalidate voters here, throw out some ballots there. If it's a 10-point spread, it's much harder to do mischief. With even a 5 point spread, it's harder to do mischief. So I think that's it. So turnout, vote for democracy, vote, yeah, to sort of like get these people who are subverting our country's like oldest and most precious traditions, right? Around uh, one person, one vote, and as you said, Kristin, having representatives that are responsive. Right? Trump's favorability is like in the low 30s
Yeah.
right now, right? I mean, it's very clear he is not doing what most people in the country want to do. But the only mechanism we've got, right, and we don't have to get him out of office. I think the short term where we do have to get him out of office, he'll be out of the office legally, but we'll have to make sure that happens in 28. But coming up, though, we really have to make sure that we have enough people to hold him accountable. And the only mechanism we have for that right now is not the courts. It's not the executive branch, it's Congress. That's the only mechanism we have for doing that. And again, it really means flipping about 6 seats in Congress to kind of make sure there is some accountability there, or electing Republicans that will be willing to do their duty in Congress.
A couple of things are really chilling as we look ahead. Number one is as we listen to the speeches of Stephen Miller, Marco Rubio, Trump, Hegseth, the whole coterie, if this is what they're saying now, what happens after midterms and they maintain a majority or get an even bigger one? Like they have razor their thin margins
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
And this is like we're at the point where Miller is saying one's very appearance is indicative of your morality and almost your worthiness as a human, right? That's before they have a strong majority or do anything at the midterm. So what then happens after? That's one thing that's really chilling. The other thing that's perhaps even more chilling is I was teaching my Justice Journey course last week, and it was all on the practical. How do we put this stuff in action? And so we went through the arc of racial justice and had some action steps. And I wanted to lead by example. So I'm telling all these participants do something. Uh, I decided to do something. I texted a bunch of my pastor friends and I said, "Did you see Trump's speech last week on the midterms on election security, supposedly?" And they're like, "No, most of them, none of them saw it. None of them saw it."
Mm.
Which, okay, all right.
Yep.
Hopefully they read an article or something like that. Then I said, what would be helpful for you in this position? Like these are all pastors who care, right? They're not unplugged, nor are they right wing. Uh, and so this is what was really chilling was most people don't care.
Yeah.
They don't think voting is important or they don't think it will make a difference and they're certainly not informed. And so one of the biggest obstacles being how do you get people to give a darn about democracy,
Yeah.
about everything that we're seeing right now when, on this podcast we're some of the most informed news junkie people out there, right? We are not expecting that of everyone, but we are expecting some level of you understand the threat, certainly enough to get out and vote, right? But that's not, every single faith leader I contacted about the midterms was just like, one of my biggest obstacles is just getting regular everyday people to care enough to go vote.
Yeah.
Mm.
And if we look to the midterms, there's even more difficulties. We haven't spent much time talking on this podcast about the Democratic Party, right?
Hmm.
And coming to you from Michigan, right, we're seeing these struggles within the party between the establishment Democrats and the more radical Democratic Socialists, and the divisions cut a number of ways. Israel, Gaza is often right part of this picture, and economic policies and so forth. And I'm watching that play out, and in normal circumstances, that can be very healthy. During the primary season, here in Michigan, we have Haley Stevens and Abdul El Sayed. And normally this is a good thing to have people engaged in politics and fighting for the direction of the Democratic Party. And there's plenty that could be done to strengthen the Democratic Party. I think that's one thing that all Democrats agree on. How to go about that is different. But what happens if your guy loses the primaries, right? And that worries me because, is this time to teach your party a lesson?
Hmm.
Or is this our last ditch attempt to, if not right the ship, at least forestall just a little bit longer, buy ourselves a little bit more time,
Yeah.
right? Whew, we need Diana here. We need Diana.
Bring some sunshine, bring
We
some
just
hope.
keep digging deeper and deeper,
Well,
darker.
we
Like,
do have some good news from Jamar though. We
Jamar,
could go certainly throw it to you, Jamar. Come on, bring us some
lift us up.
updates and some things we could celebrate.
I mean, it's good news in the sense that there's progress. I don't know that the message is all that
Right?
good
That's
news
fair,
here.
fair.
So yeah, I finally finished copy edits on my latest book, Notes from an Evangelical Reject, and I switched publishers. So all my books previously have been with Zondervan, a division of HarperCollins. This is with Convergent out of Penguin Random House, and I think there was an extra round in their editing process because I
Yes.
thought the last round was it. So then I get another message like, "Can you have this done in the next 2 weeks?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah, here we go again." But this was just the grammar part, the
Mhm.
word level part. For folks who aren't familiar, copy edits are the last touch you get before you can't change anything anymore. So this was it. This was it. And I kind of shut down everything this week to be able to finish that, and I did, and got it in on deadline, which is an achievement for me personally. But it was good to be able to go back over and read it because it reminds you why you wrote it. Here's the real truth, honestly. Marketers don't necessarily like this, but I wrote the book for me. I wrote the book for the version of me 10 years ago, when I'm deep in reformed evangelicalism, when people like John Piper and John MacArthur and Douglas Wilson and R.C. Sproul and whoever you want to name were kind of the in the milieu that I was. And I'm writing for outlets like Christianity Today, Gospel Coalition, Desiring God. And I knew something was off then, but I was still sort of part of those circles. And what I needed was an analysis that said that what I'm seeing is actually what I'm seeing, what I'm sensing is actually what I'm sensing. And before I had to go through all these painful events and incidents and learn the hard way and have all these scars, but now I'm thankful because I get to pay it forward. I get to take that wisdom of rejection and share it with others. And so I think that's like the core of it, but also there's some history in there. I had fun researching J. Howard Pugh and his connections to
Mm.
Grove City College, and his libertarian free market capitalist views and how that impacted how they received me slash rejected me all the way in 2020. So, what I'm basically tracing is I came into white evangelicalism during this racial reconciliation movement in the 1990s. What happened to that? Part of what happened to it is this rise from within the ranks of white Christian nationalism, and how that, white Christian nationalism was this hard wall that anybody who was truly trying to pursue racial reconciliation just crashed into.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit for everyone. It's for people who are in and debating whether they should leave. It'll embolden you. It's for people who have left and are trying to figure out what comes next. It'll be a little bit of a roadmap. And it's for the folks who aren't Christian but are just wondering, like, what the heck is this religion thing and this evangelical thing, because it's cropping up in our politics, but I don't really get it. So it's a memoir, but it's got some history involved in there too, and it's different than I've done before, but it's my part in the writing part is done, and so it's a milestone. Now comes the marketing and promotion, which is its own job on its own.
Oof, that is true.
Well,
So
But
here.
January,
Congrats.
thank
congrats.
Congrats,
you.
Jamar. Yeah, it's worth marking. Yeah.
And it is true that it sometimes isn't until you get to copy edits that you can actually sit back and see the piece as a whole. At least
Yeah.
that's often my experience. You know, you're just especially the last, you know, when you get into proofs and
Hmm.
you really can't make any significant changes. They won't let you. So you just have to kind of sit back and read for typos, and
That's
that's
it.
it.
Yeah. I think that feeling kind of hit me strongest with this book. It's like it's 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 not done. I can't do anything more with
Yeah.
it, you know?
Mhm.
If you've had that feeling before as a
Yeah, I
writer.
always have that. Compare it to that, familiar, like getting on the roller coaster and the little bar comes down and now you can't get
You
off.
can't get out. It's always kind of terrifying.
You're just along for the ride at this point, right?
What's done
It
is
is what it
done.
is. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, which is hard when you've been tinkering with the thing for
Right.
Oh,
years,
Yeah.
questioning everything, and then all of a sudden, boom, done. Like out of your
yep.
hands. Yep.
Well, I'm super excited for both of your books coming this fall. I think so timely, and so important. And so, we're all writers. We happen to speak. We happen to talk real good on a podcast, but the written word is also our bag. So, be sure to pre-order all of our books as well as grab Diana's, which is already out. Any other final thoughts as we go forth here? Something positive, maybe?
Oh, well, I will
I'd
say
like to phone a friend. Um,
let me say that last week when I weighed in here, we were in the middle of our Michigan apocalypse with
That's right.
terrible air quality, and we're under a heat dome, and then personally, our refrigerator went out right. Right after the night after I got off our call too, and so I feel like I think what even happened this last week, it was survival here in the DeMay house, but all that's better. Our new fridge was delivered yesterday. And the weather is incredible, absolutely gorgeous, cool 70s, beautiful breeze, the air quality fine again. And so it feels like this little rebirth here in Michigan after we all survived the hellscape that was last week. I mean, we still can't eat lettuce, but you know,
Which
unless
now is like a right wing thing too, I'm reading about.
I should say we can. I've just been going to my local farm, which is where I usually
Oh,
buy
nice.
most of my summer produce anyway. But I have to admit, the convenience of those bagged salad mixes has been nice. But now, just go for the leaf lettuce fresh from the farm. So, yeah.
Very good. Well, we'll take that, the heat dome may endure for a week, but cooler temps come.
Yes, hang
Very good.
on.
Well, as we often say, come with your despair, stay for the truth, and grow in community. So, on behalf of me and my co host, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Convocation Unscripted. But don't stop here, folks. Don't just shut it off. If it was helpful to you, then go ahead and click that box with the arrow in it that indicates share and text it to someone or put it on social media and let others know. Of course, subscribe at convocation.substack.com and to all our individual Substacks. We will see you at the next convocation.